If you have a Bible with you, hopefully you do. If not, there are Bibles available. You can grab one. It'd be great if you could have one in front of you. I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 2 and the first 12 verses. Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born, King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it arose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Well, some very familiar verses. I'm sure we've heard lots of sermons preached on the strange visitors from afar. I want to just kind of have a look at this with you briefly. I say briefly because I could probably preach for a couple of hours on this passage. There's quite a lot here, but we may not always see it. Last week, I shared with you about a tool that you could have in your toolbox when you do Bible study. Some of you may remember I said names are not always names and places are not always places. Another tool that you could have when you do Bible study is to think of the Bible like Wikipedia. Anyone ever heard of Wikipedia? Anyone know Wikipedia? Yes? You know when you go on there, and it's just all kinds of information, isn't there? And you're reading a page, and on that page, as you're reading, there may be another kind of name or a place, and it's underlined, isn't it? And it's in blue. And if you click on that, it takes you to another page. Anyone experienced that before? It's called a hyperlink. Okay? And you click on that, and it takes you to another page, and you click on something else, and before you know it, you can't remember where you were to start with. It's taken you in different places. And the Bible is like that. There are hyperlinks that you can click on, if you will, and look at. So in the very first verse that I read, it says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Well, Bethlehem is a hyperlink, and I've talked to you about the meaning and significance, and you can do your study and find out. Then it says, during the time of King Herod. Well, that's another one. You can click on that and go into history and find out who this guy was and what he did. And then it says, Magi from the east. Okay, there's another one that you can click on and go, well, who were they? And that's how I do my Bible study. Whatever passage I'm reading, I look and think, is there something I could kind of click on and it would take me to another part of the Bible or another place where I could learn a bit more? And so this passage is full of them. And as we come to it, I'm not going to go into all the in-depth and the history and the background, as I said, because we'll be here all week. Maybe I'll do that as a study sometime. But clearly, we have these strange visitors that appear. And so I just want to ask some questions. Firstly, who were they? Why did they come? And what did they find when they came? So it says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Many of us will be familiar with the idea that they actually came after Jesus was born. Everyone familiar with that? Yeah. Some scholars, or most scholars probably, will say it could have been a year to 2 years after the birth. So they weren't at the major scene. I know that kind of causes a bit of a problem for some people because we like our traditions, don't we? There's lots of traditions and baggage. I preached on this a while ago in another church, and a lady came running up to me afterwards, very irate. "You've ruined Christmas," she said. You know, for me, it was like, if your Christmas is based on the fact of whether or not the Magi were at the... that's not really the main crux of it all, is it? Isn't the whole crux of Jesus' birth the fact that God became flesh and dwelt amongst us and came to live? Does it really matter whether the Magi were at the manger scene? Does it matter? You know, for me, it doesn't. But there's a lot of tradition, isn't there, about these strange visitors who appeared. Tradition tells us that there were 3. Is that right? We've just sung it, haven't we? We've just sung it. We 3 kings of Orient are. One in a taxi and one in a car. Is that right? I always get the words wrong. But we sing it, don't we? And tradition tells us that there were 3. Why does tradition tell us there were 3? Because there were 3 gifts. So somebody came up with the idea that there were 3, and then someone came up with the idea of, well, one was from Ethiopia, one's from India, and one's from Greece. And then somebody else came up with the idea, well, we'll give them names, so we call them Gaspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. Anyone familiar with this? And then in the 12th century, somebody said they found the skulls of these 3. And apparently, he knew that they were the 3 kings because the eyes were still in the sockets and they were fixed on Jerusalem. And now they're in a cathedral in Cologne, if you want to kind of go and apparently buried underneath this cathedral. I mean, there's no evidence whatsoever to any of that, but we have all this baggage, don't we? And this tradition, and every Christmas card will be these 3 visitors riding on camels coming to the stable. Am I right? Yeah. So I just a word of caution. Don't base your understanding, your theology on carols or on Christmas cards. Okay? So what does it say? What does it tell us? Well, we don't know much, to be honest. We don't know. But can we make an educated guess? That's kind of where I come at it. Because we don't know who these people are. We don't know that... It doesn't say there were 3. It just says wise men. Okay, so it's got to be more than 1, right? Yep. Could have been 2. Could have been 200. We don't know. But they came to Jerusalem. So who are they? Well, my guess is that they came from the Medo-Persian Empire. They would have come from Babylon. And my guess is that they were part of a priestly tribe. Again, this is one of the hyperlinks. You can go and explore it. They were the kingmakers from the Medo-Persian Empire. And they were the ones, if you wanted to be a king in that empire, they were the ones who would choose who the king would be. So the question is, why did they come to Jerusalem? It says we have come, and they asked a question, didn't they? Where is he who's been born King of the Jews? Why on earth did they ask that question? Do you ever wonder? How did they know? How did they know to come looking for the King of the Jews? I mean, if they came from Babylon, that would be a journey of 800 miles. Okay? Now just imagine this for a second, 800 miles. Imagine that, let's just say for argument's sake, they did 20 miles a day. Okay? How many days is that? 40. Imagine that, 20 miles a day for 40 days. They come on a journey. These guys, I mean, I wonder what their wives were thinking. You know, just heading off for a few days, love. I thought it was a business trip, you know. But off they go. Why would they come all that way? To find the King of the Jews? So there are questions that arise, I think, that we try and work it out. And my educated guess would be that this idea of the Magi, that's what it says here, it's also mentioned in our Old Testament. It's mentioned in the book of Daniel. Do you remember Daniel? Remember there was the exiles were taken from Jerusalem out into Babylon for 70 years. And one of the young men who was taken was a young guy called Daniel. Do you remember that? Yeah. And Daniel was a very, very significant guy. And there in Babylon, the king at the time, if you remember the story, he had a dream. And he called together all of his leaders and his magi, these guys from this kingmaker, influential, official tribe. They were there, and he called them in, and he said to them, I had a dream last night. I need the interpretation. So they said, sure, king, that's fine, no problem. Tell us the dream and we'll give you the interpretation. And if you remember, he then said, no, you tell me the dream and the interpretation, and if you don't, I'm going to kill you. Anyone fancy that one? They weren't very happy. They were panicked. These wise men were freaking out. And there is this young Jewish man called Daniel who says, actually, I know a God who knows everything. And he came in, he told the dream, he told the interpretation, he saved the wise men's bacon, and he is then made chief over this group. That's what it tells us in the book of Daniel. He was in charge of the Magi. And so for me, as I think about it, it's my educated guess that Daniel would have sort of given some kind of influence and advice on this priestly group of officials and would have told them about a Jewish Messiah. If you read the book of Daniel, Daniel actually gives the timeline of when Jesus would be born. It's really interesting. I think he would have exerted influence over them, and they would have passed that down, and he would have quoted scripture, I'm sure. He would have quoted Isaiah 9, which says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. I'm sure he would have quoted Isaiah 60, if any of you know that one. Arise, shine, for your light has come. Do you remember that? The glory of the Lord has risen on you. Do you remember? Do you remember the next verse? The next verse says, nations will come to your light and kings to the brightness of your dawn. That's Isaiah 60. Or what about Psalm 72? Psalm 72, again, similar. I think these would have been things that Daniel would have talked about. It says, may the kings of Tarshish and of distant shores bring tribute to him. May the kings of Sheba and Seba present him gifts. May all kings bow down to serve him, and all nations serve him. May gold from Sheba be given him. It's interesting, isn't it? All these verses that we find in Scripture from Isaiah and from Psalms, I think Daniel would have explained those to the Magi, and I think they would have passed it down. So why did they come? I think they had an already understanding of the fact that there was going to be a Messiah, a king. But it says we saw his star. I don't know about you, but you know some of these documentary channels? There's always a program every Christmas about somebody claiming to have found the Star of Bethlehem. I don't know if you've ever seen it. All these different people have theories. Some people think it was, a supernova, an exploding star. Some think it was a comet. Some think it was, the colliding of planets together. People trying to give a natural explanation. The answer is we don't know. We don't know what it is. But clearly it was something. It was something that got their attention. Some have linked it to the book of Numbers. If you know Numbers chapter 24, there's a prophecy by Balaam. Some of you remember Balaam and the donkey. Balaam prophesies, and as he's prophesying, he says, I see him, but not yet. I behold him, but not now. He's looking into the future, and he says, a star will rise from Jacob. And the idea that possibly this is linked, that this would have been shared by Daniel with the wise men, so they knew there would be some astronomical phenomenon in the sky. Some people go, well, what was it? People question the Bible and go, come on, scientifically, a star doesn't move, does it? So it can't be true. Have you ever had someone say that to you? I have. It's always interesting because I think if you go back to the beginning of your Bible, the very first verse of the Bible, what does it say? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it's my belief that if you believe that verse, you have no problem with the rest. Right? If we believe that God can make the intricacies of this planet and of you, the amazing design, he can make a universe that is far bigger than our brains can comprehend. Can he not do the impossible? In chapter 1 of the book of Genesis, it says that God made the sun and the moon, didn't it? But it also, there's a little phrase which I love. It says he also made the stars. So if God created the universe and he made the stars, then in my mind, it's not really that difficult to imagine that God could make one of them move. Right? That's the way I look at it. And so if I don't have a problem with believing that God is the designer of the universe and the creator of the universe, then he can do what he wants. And if he wants to make a star move around, then that's fine. And he does. And they saw his star, and they came to Jerusalem, and they came to King Herod. And I've said to you, that's a little link. Herod was a nasty guy, by the way. He killed his wife. One of his wives. I think he had 9, I think. He killed one of his wives and his mother-in-law. Just prior to Jesus' birth, he killed 2 of his sons because he was paranoid they'd take over from him. He was in his 80s. Okay? Not a nice guy at all. And it says when they arrived, he was troubled. Why was he troubled? Because he was worried. I don't think Herod would have been troubled with 3 guys on camels. I don't think that would have troubled him very much. I think he would have been more troubled if, as I think it could have been hundreds, even up to 1,000, most scholars think, of this entourage that appears in Jerusalem. With these officials. And they would wear these conical hats. And I imagine they weren't riding camels, but Persian steeds. And these are the kingmakers. And they turn up and they say, where is he who's been born king of the Jews? And Herod's like, but I am. Herod was given the title by the Senate in Rome in like 40 BC. He's like, I'm the king of the Jews, but he wasn't the king of the Jews, was he? He wasn't Jewish. He was an Edomite. But it says he was troubled, and then it says, and all Jerusalem with him. Why were they troubled? Why were they troubled? Because Herod was troubled. It's a bit like, if Mum's upset, then everyone's going to get upset, right? Herod's upset. And everyone is worried. And this is where we have to worry about our carols. Because we've just sung, haven't we? We three kings of Orient are. But perhaps it should be, we large entourage of kingmakers from Persia and Babylon are. But I don't think that would pass the carol selection committee. And so we stick with we three kings. So we always have to be careful of basing our theology on our Christmas cards or our carols. So they end up coming to Bethlehem eventually. It tells us that they saw the star and they were overjoyed. And then verse 11, it says, on coming to the house. I don't know how many times I have read that or heard that when I was a kid at carol service after carol service after carol service, and I never picked up on it. It never registered with me. I know the story, and we read it. It says on coming to the house. Clearly it wasn't the manger scene, right? On coming to the house, they saw the child. That word in the original language is not the word for a baby as it says in Luke. It's a toddler. So most scholars would say up to 2 years later. So on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and having arrived, what did they do? They bowed down and worshipped him. And I love that. Here are these Gentile kingmakers from Babylon who have some inkling that a child has been born, and this child is no ordinary child. And they come and they bow down and they worship him. And as I was thinking on this passage, I thought they came seeking something. And I was wondering what we are seeking. Every day I'm seeking more of God. I want to learn more. I want to find out more. And I hope that's your heart too. But the idea is, what are we seeking? God says you will find me if you seek me with all your heart. They came seeking. They traveled 800 miles to get to find what they were looking for. I wonder how far we would go to find what we want to find. The shepherds didn't have far to go, did they? They only had a short walk down the hill into Bethlehem. But these strange visitors from afar, they traveled much further. When I think about people, we all start in different positions in life, don't we? But we're all on a journey towards something. We're all seeking something. And some of us maybe have traveled a short distance to find Jesus. Maybe some of us have traveled a longer distance. But these strangers came from afar. They came a long way, and they finally found what they were looking for, and their response to finding the child was to worship him. And they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts. Of course, we know this, the 3 gifts. We've just sung it, haven't we? The gold and frankincense and myrrh, and you'll know the significance of those gifts. Gold for a king. Frankincense is that incense they would burn. The priests would burn it. Jesus is our high priest. And myrrh's the odd one out, isn't it? I always think Mary and Joseph are there, and they're presented with myrrh, and probably Joseph's like, well, yeah, thanks for the embalming fluid. It's not really the gift, is it, that you want? But it's a gift that spoke to what would happen with Jesus. And for many of us, we know what happens, that he doesn't stay the baby in the manger. He grows up, he lives and dies, and that myrrh will have been part of the embalming, or they would put that with the dead body. It speaks again of the cross being over the manger. So who were these strangers? Well, we don't really know, but we can make an educated guess. What did they come to find? They came to find the King of the Jews. And who did they find? They found the child, the Christ child. And their response was to worship. I wonder what our response is today. Is our response to worship? Is our response to bow down? Not before the baby in the manger. Not before a little toddler. Today we bow down before the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, who is in heaven, who is interceding for each of us, who is the one mediator between God and humanity, and is the one that we worship. And we're going to share communion together as we kind of come towards the end of our service. And it's a reminder of the fact that Christmas is not just about a baby, but it's about the arrival of the most important person in history and of what he did. And so for us, our response is to come on bended knee and to offer something, right? What are we going to offer him today? Isn't that the old carol? What can I give him? Poor as I am. If I were a shepherd, I would bring a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. Yet what I can, I give him. Give my heart. And my prayer is today that we would once again give our hearts to Jesus. And you might say, well, Paul, I did that 50 years ago. I would say each and every day I wake up and say, I want to give you my heart again. I want to seek more of you again. It's an ongoing, day-to-day lifestyle. And so I think that as we come now to communion, as we think about what this baby is going to achieve in his life, I wonder if we might just worship. Come and bow before him, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And so we're going to sing together.